Hi, welcome to another edition of the Everlast Power video series. Today's a very special topic. Many of you have asked us how to turn a stick welder into a DC TIG welder. Now, that's a very good question because a lot of you don't have the budget to just start out buying the very best thing on the market. And we understand that. So we're going to show you today how to take your Power Arc welder and turn it into a nice little scratch start TIG rig. Now, of course, you're not going to be welding aluminum with this unit, but you can use it for DC TIG welding on stainless or regular steel. And it can be used for chrome moly or any other application. The basic limitation of using a stick welder like this for a TIG unit is that your low end is not quite low enough for some of the thinner metals that you need. Now, of course, you're going to have a high amperage capacity, but on a transformer welder, typically you're not going to have less than 40 or 50 amps to play with on the low end. Now with our units, we're fortunate because we go down to 20 amps, and that's a reasonable amperage that you can go down to and still weld pretty thin metal. Now, of course, we already have our Power Arc 140 and our Power Arc 160 available as a stick TIG package, and they're already programmed to go to actually lower than the 20 amp settings that we have on our Power Arc 200 and our Power Arc 300. Now, if you have just a plain DC stick inverter, you're going to be able to get a pretty low amperage with whoever's brand that you're using. But with ours, we go down to 20 amps, so it's going to be a nice low amperage for most people to weld at. Now, if you need to go with our unit here, of course, you can go up to 300 amps, and that's a pretty heavy-duty TIG welder. And this kind of welding is done all the time in the field, especially in the pipe industry or whatever, where you just have a DC power unit and they're TIG welding with it. Now, one thing I ought to mention is that when you're welding with a stick welder, typically a stick welder is going to put out a little bit more voltage than ideal for TIG welding. Not that it can't be done or there's any problem with it, just that a good smooth TIG arc doesn't require as much voltage to get a good weld as a stick welder does. So a stick welder will still put out a great arc. You're just going to have a little higher voltage, and then you're going to need to use a little bit less amperage than you would normally use. Now with our Power Arc 300, we have our welding current, our arc force, and then of course our surge or hot start current. Now when you're welding TIG, you don't want to have your arc force or your surge current turned up. So you want to turn them all the way down. Now if you've got our Power Arc 200, that's already built in, and it regulates pretty good when you're doing TIG. But you need to make sure that you're not employing the use of arc force or creating a hot start when you're trying to weld TIG, because it'll be counterproductive. To get started turning your stick welder into a TIG welder, you're going to need a gas valve torch. Now, almost any series is available with a gas valve built into it. The gas valve torch is used in the field every day, and it's pretty common, so you're not going to have much trouble procuring one. If you're going to order a torch, though, just be sure to specify that it's a gas valve torch, which usually has a V after the series. For many modern DC stick welders, especially inverters, connecting the TIG torch to the welder is not a problem, especially with our torches, because we already provide the standard DINS connector that we use on our products with the torch. So this unit has a DINS connector on the TIG torch already. Now, in a pinch, if you can't find the connections that you need to make it mate to your stick welder, you can always take your tong type stick electrode holder and clamp it around the edge right here. Now that'll work, and you can just simply wrap some electrical tape around it, or you can do something to protect that connection right here. That's a very simple and well-proven way of doing it. It's not ideal, but it'll work for most cases. Next, you're going to need an Argon Regulator. Now, Argon regulators can be very pricey, but if you shop around, you can find one that fits into a $40 or $50 budget online. We actually have regulators available as well that are very well priced, and we have these typically available as part of our packages with our other units, but we also sell these individually. Now this unit I've been using in the shop quite a bit. I've got it set up with a hard piece of poly tubing here. Now the hard piece of tubing is a little better than the soft pieces of tubing because it doesn't balloon out when you've got your gas shut off, and when you open up your gas valve you don't get a sudden whoosh of gas like you would with softer tubing. Now, to connect your torch to the regulator is not a big deal. All you need is a double-ended hose barb. What I have here is a 1/8 hose barb, and this actually slides down inside this tubing quite well. And when you're doing it, don't forget to use a very small hose clamp. So now we've got our connection here. We're going to hook it up to an argon tank. And of course, when you're welding with TIG, you've got to have pure argon. You can't use a carbon dioxide argon blend. You have to use pure argon or argon helium. Argon is going to be your cheapest option over argon helium blend because helium is so expensive. Now, a quick note about our units. Because we have a DC TIG, we are actually going to be welding electrode negative. And when you're welding stick, you're going to be welding with electrode positive, and the torch will be over here. But when you're welding with TIG, you want your work clamp in this spot. And because we have the 6010 port, we want to ignore the 6010 port and use the lower voltage standard port for the electrode negative. Now we've just connected our TIG torch, so now we're going to connect our work clamp. Okay, so as a review, we have our TIG torch set up here with all the back cap and everything ready to TIG weld, and we have a negative electrode here with the TIG torch being connected to the negative terminal. And because this is a lower voltage output on our units, we're using this on the regular one that we'd weld our 7018s with. We don't want the 6010 because it puts out too much voltage. Now we also have our work clamp on the positive. As part of the review, remember we've turned our arc force current down and our surge current down. If you've got an automatic surge current or arc force control, don't worry about it. It'll be fine. This just gives you a little bit more flexibility in how it's set. And if you've got control over it, just turn it down to 0. It'll be a lot better. Now keep in mind that when you're scratch start TIG welding, the tungsten is going to be hot at all times. And that means if you accidentally touch it to the metal somewhere, it's going to flash you. Now what a lot of people do, they take a piece of rubber hose and just slide over the end of the consumable here, and that protects the tip from getting touched accidentally to the metal. And then you can lay it anywhere you want. Otherwise, you're going to have to make sure this tungsten is not touching anything that's been grounded to the work. Okay, so we've assembled our TIG torch and everything, and we've got our gas ready to go. In our next video, we're going to show you how to do a little bit of scratch start TIG welding.